This past month has certainly been indicative of the trials and tribulations of building a project bike. The last 4 episodes have mostly been just straight wins caught on film, but not this time around. The BMW build had proven to me that my school motto actually does ring true. Nothing without great effort. So yeah, on the 30th of May, I had attended my commencement ceremony, and even though I had technically been done with classes since December, the ceremony itself was a nice series of pep talks that ultimately contribute to this pumped up feeling of mine. As far back as April 30th, I had received the matching subframe kit to the suspension linkage that I had bought at the beginning of the year for the K100, designed by the custom bike builder Gustavo Lorenzo of the Retrorides Garage in Brazil. The box says cafe4racer.eu because the kit is available there already machined and built, but there's an issue with buying it pre-built from this vendor, and it became very apparent very quickly. You see, for the suspension linkage, they only really provide basic instructions on how to install it properly, and it's not very comprehensive at all. And quite frankly, when it comes to the C platform, you get absolutely nothing in the way of instructions, and there are actually a few very important nuances to take note of when installing these parts. The great thing, however, is that the designers in Brazil sell an online kit of information which contains PDF, images, and things like the CAD plans for parts like the C platform, suspension linkage, the ornamental velocity stacks, ignition mounts, the things that you find on their builds. So you can make the parts yourself with the proper machinery, and it includes early pictures of their original build, so it gives you a good idea of what your bike should be looking like at each step. They give you a data sheet for the shocks, they give you a list of machining shops around the world, wiring diagrams, and the most important thing though is that they give you an ebook that they have dubbed the Cafe Racer Bible for the K series of bikes. It features very comprehensive instructions and advice from a shop that is pretty much the best in the business when it comes to K bikes. Honestly, I don't think we would have installed this kit properly without this guide, because it showed steps that I had no idea were necessary to the install, by simply just looking at the bikes to have it fitted to them, so like eyeballing it. And it was given to me free of charge personally by Gustavo to help with this build, and for that, I'm very grateful. I'm also grateful to be able to call Retrorides the first and only sponsor for this build so far. The product is currently available on the Retrorides website for $130 and it's distributed electronically to customers, so you provide your email and they'll send it to you via Google Drive. If you're looking to use this kit, be sure to check it out, because really that's the only way to get comprehensive instructions on this whole thing. Now, you don't need guidance to know that you'll obviously need to remove the old subframe to install the new one. For some annoying reason, BMW chose to stamp the VIN numbers on this rear half of the frame instead of, just on the steering head. Not only that, but it's very close to the welds between the joint at the back of the frame where you have to cut to remove the tail. While cutting, you just have to make sure that you keep the VIN numbers at least mostly legible if your VIN happens to be in one of these inconvenient locations. The fuse box was in the way, so I had to cut the little tabs so I could drop it down a little bit more. The second VIN number was slightly cut off, but I have the other one, so really I didn't mind. After you get all 4 points of the subframe, the whole back just pops right off, and really it firmly places you in a point of no return. You just destroyed your frame. Because remember, that's the part where the suspension attaches to. No suspension, no rolling. No rolling, no riding. Hell, there's no way for the shit to even stand up on its own 2 wheels. Really, it was a bold move, but it was a power move to show my commitment to the vision. I then wanted to mock up the seat and the subframe together on the bike with nothing messing up that sightline back there. So I ground down the little tabs that connect the tank to the fairing so I can mount everything up using zip ties and magnets. The result was a bike that looked great from some angles, but in other angles, the seat had begun to show that it might be a little bit too bulky for the now shortened bike. But either way, I was definitely liking where this was headed for sure. Now, I made a mistake when it came to the shock, and I bought a really nice condition FZ09 shock for pretty cheap. It was only like 32 bucks. And it would be fine, but it turns out that it was a little bit too long at 320 millimeters or so. See, the kit calls for a 300mm shock, but when I bought the shock, I didn't have the Bible just yet to know that. And that's an example of why the actual instructions from Retrorides are so helpful. No matter though, I'll fix that later this episode with a Suzuki Bandit shock. Also, for the record, these shocks are just cheap ones for the mock-up of the bike. When I actually finish the bike, it'll be a brand new shock. The next day of work came when Ginger had taken delivery of the 3-spoke wheel from a 1995 BMW R1100 RS. The great thing about BMWs between the 1980s and the 1990s, and hell, even the early 2000s, is that a lot of the wheels between the R and the K bikes can interchange with only a little bit of finagling. I chose this wheel because I wanted a 3-spoke wheel to match the GSX-R one up front, and I also wanted a wheel that was able to accept a 160 width rear tire as opposed to a 130, which would expand my selection of tires and also give it a more aggressive look in the back. A very knowledgeable enthusiast was kind enough to share the information as to what would fit the bike, and based on that information, I had decided that I wanted the 4.5 by 18 wheel, the 3-spoke. I bought this one for only $75 shipped. Granted, there's a catch, and for one, it's this undesirable taxi cab yellow, and it actually has some pretty bad rash on the inside of it. And it doesn't look like it would compromise the structural integrity of the wheel, but my powder coating guys are also wheel repair guys, so I'll just ask their opinion on it, whether or not it's worth it in the end or not. It's also a plus that the bike has a tire mounted because it aids with the mock-up, and also it allowed the bike to roll later on, without having to commit to buying a brand new tire that won't be used anytime soon. So out in the backyard, I removed the old wheel and made sure to reuse the 2mm spacer that comes with this bike. I also reused the bolts as well. And just like that, it bolts up and spins without getting caught on anything. But let me show you something. The clearance between the tire and the swing arm? Tight. But it clears, it actually does clear. And BMW makes a 3mm spacer, which I may throw one of those in there in place of the 2mm. By this point, I had also the correct shock for the mock-up too, which was a 1996 Bandit 600 shock that's 300mm long, and it fit the space perfectly. Only problem is that the eye hole is one bolt size lower, but that doesn't really matter right now, or at all honestly, since the bike won't be ridden with that shock. The concept was coming together. And I also want to give you a comparison between the wheel width. It's still the same diameter at 18 inches, but when paired up with the 17 inch up front, it will create that pitched forward look that I'm going for. It was looking real good so far, if I may say so myself. Now here's where things had begun to get a little shaky when it came to actually welding the parts into place. And for the sake of not repeating myself for the next 10 minutes, I'll just give you a very brief explanation. But if you want the detailed story, check out the last motovlog that I put out called Why the BMW Took So Long, quote unquote. Basically the idea of trying to weld the bike myself with an arc welder went south, because even though I was capable of welding steel pieces of the same thickness with no problem, welding the rather thick steel mounts for the kit to the rather thin metal of the frame proved to be a real problem, because with high amperage the frame would just get a hole melted into it, which happened to me like twice, and with low amperage the arc would simply it wouldn't stay lit, or it wouldn't penetrate the thick steel. Kind of going through it, I managed to get one side of the subframe mounted, but it wouldn't hold up to the strength tests. It became very clear that I needed a professional for this one, and that's when a fellow vlogger by the name of JP linked me to his own welding contact, who proved to be quite awesome at his job. So we borrowed a big van from a family member and chucked the bike into it in 3 pieces and drove it over to his shop. This job was gonna be finished today for fucking sure. It was go time. So this is Keith. He's a professional welder. He does his magic, welding, in his shop on the border of Brooklyn and Queens. For the record, I stayed at the shop and helped out from start to finish. However, you won't see that because obviously if I'm doing work, no one is holding the camera. I was actually doing more work than filming. So the first job was to clean up the mess that I made on the frame so that the welding surface is nice and clean again. He even filled up the hole that I burned into the frame. We then used a piece of the rear frame with the VIN plate to use as a sort of stretcher for when it's time to mount the shock linkage.
People wanna know how many styles I got, like how I can switch from hip-hop to classic rock. I say I'm classically trained, I got an ear for the classics. I got classical aim because I'm a class addict. Other cats be asthmatic or too emphatic. Messing with me could be quite problematic.
This is the other piece of the rear frame with the stamped VIN tag. I don't know if you remember, but my cut was actually pretty sloppy on that side, so Keith had to fill the edge of this piece of the frame, you know, just by welding it alone before we install it. It was at this point that the beers and the shots started flowing. And naturally things have begun to get a lot more interesting.
Almost like we know what we're doing.
More of my crap welds had to be removed from the mounts themselves. By the way, I'd like to dedicate all of these sparky grinding shots to Ducati NYC, who jokingly told me that these shots are the sign of a real build show. You know what else is a sign of a real build show? Sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Foster's, Australian for beer.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little wiggle in this right now. But, it's pretty good.
So we tack weld all the mounts into place, and then we remove the subframe, and then we perma weld it. And then suspension linkage parts.
Boom! That welds. I mean, we got a little more to do to it. That shot? That wasn't even a big shot, right?
I was winding down, so I'm good, yeah.
There you go. Nice.
And then victory shots because we got everything welded in the same day. And then my phone died. But we did it. Mostly Keith did it with his welding though, but it was done. It was a bit of a fiasco getting the bike off the table, but in the end we were able to do that as well, and we got everything done between 10 a.m. and about 6:30 p.m. Honestly, it was tiring, but at times it didn't even feel like work. It just felt like I was hanging out with a friend, especially when the booze started to kick in. I learned a few things while working with Keith, and I highly recommend him for any bike welder needs. Hell, even though we finished that day, I was unable to take the bike home the same day because I didn't have access to the van until the next morning. So he graciously let me keep the bike in his backyard until then. Thanks again, Keith. So the next morning I had begun to reassemble the bike in my backyard, but I had noticed that the bare metal parts have flash rusted in the rain, which Keith warned me that they would do. So even though I had plans to powder coat the frame, he recommended that I just put a coat of black paint on it just, for the time being. But before then I had to wire brush the frame to get that surface rust off, which came off nice and easy. I then masked off the bronze pivot area so I could apply a quick and dirty layer of paint, just to protect the bare metal. Nothing pretty, just something quick. I let it dry for about a half hour and I was ready to mount everything back up. Now, with everything mounted up, it actually had become very apparent that this seat just was not going to work because it's just too long, it's too tall, and it's not really proportional to the rest of the bike, so I won't be using it. You served me well. I like it a lot, but it's not going to work. So the next day, I had begun to think about what seat I could use with the bike. And every seat that I had looked up, it was just way too small, like in every single way, every dimension possible, it was just too small. And it had kind of exposed an error to me that we had made when installing the subframe. Do you see how the bars, they go straight back, like parallel, like perfectly aligned with each other? Funny thing is, they're actually supposed to taper inward towards the back slightly. So like think of like a triangle that you cut off, right? It doesn't go to a point, but it actually kind of goes inward a little bit. It's not really supposed to be perfectly straight. And I'm not too worried about that because I'm pretty sure we could just heat up the mounts, with a torch and then bend them inwards a few degrees and then the problem would be fixed, no problem. But still, I wanted to see how a hypothetical seat would look and feel on a bike as is. So I made a mock-up seat for the time being. I went to Home Depot and I picked up some air conditioner cushion foam, some Gorilla Glue spray, and I actually also had some vinyl fabric sheet left around from the time where I was going to reupholster that hideously fucked up seat on the YZF years ago. I just ended up using Gorilla Tape, and I never actually used the fabric, so I still had it. I used the cardboard to cut out a basic shape for the seat pan, then I traced the same shape into the foam pad, which was big enough to stack 2 layers of foam. Then I got to work cutting it. I found a piece of strong flat wood and glued it underneath the cardboard, and then I wrapped this abomination in the fabric. And bam! Yep, it's ugly as shit. But it definitely showed me that these really should be heated up and bent inwards, like I have to go through with that plan. Because the seat place here, it would just be way too square with too wide of a cutoff area in the back. But this is something I will address later. You know, the plus side is that this mock-up seat, despite how hideous it is, it's actually quite comfortable to sit on, and it's usable if I ever need to ride this prototype anywhere. Well, at least that's the aspiration, right? And I think that's about it for now. I'm contemplating on what I should tackle next, and I was thinking maybe mount a headlight, the real handlebars, you know, the rear sets, the airbox, the pod filter, all that stuff. Basically anything but the electronics right now, which, yes, I'm very much trying to put off at the moment. I'd love to hear this thing run again, and I know y'all would love to too, but you know, let's just see where this goes from here. I can safely say that the hard part is very, very much over. And it wasn't without its hardships. Because after all, nothing without great effort. Thanks for watching.